Hey, it's Liz from No Trace. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a really cute scrappy zipper pouch. This design uses 3-inch squares of fabric, so it's a really great way to use up if you ever do boxed corners on some of your bags. It's a great way to use up your boxed corner scraps or just really small 3x3 pieces of fabric. So let's go. In order to make this scrappy zipper pouch, we're going to be using a bunch of 3-inch squares of fabric. So I have about 24 squares here that are all 3x3, and I like to use really neutral colors for this sort of scrappy design so that it doesn't get too busy, but you might want to go crazy and have lots of bright colors. So this is going to be a really neutral look. You're also going to need 2 pieces of liner fabric that are 8 inches tall and 10.5 inches wide, and 2 pieces of cotton batting that are also 8 inches tall and 10.5 inches wide. And you'll also need a 9-inch zipper, and if you need to shorten a zipper, you can do that, and you want the full length of your zipper to be about 10.5 inches, but a 9-inch zipper, that's the full measurement is about 10.5, but this is a 9-inch zipper. And then I'm also going to use a small piece of ribbon or strapping to put on the side of my pouch. So this is about 3 inches of ribbon. We're going to do a super simple quilting design with these 3-inch squares, and what we're going to do is have an alternating white with a little bit of color, and we're going to create 3 rows of 4 3-inch squares. So we need a total of 12 3-inch squares for each of the panels of our bag. So I'm going to be creating this super simple design, and the way I'm going to sew these squares together is to first sew them into rows going this way. So sew these 2 right sides together, and then this one right side together with this one. And then once I have 4 rows, I'm going to sew the rows together with the right sides facing. So over at the machine, I'm going to start with these 2 squares that were on the far left side, and I'm going to stitch them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I want to do a little back stitch at the start and the stop. Once these 2 are sewn together, I'm going to get the last piece for this, I guess this is a column, and I'm going to stitch this onto my centerpiece with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, I'm going to do a back stitch at the start and at the stop. So now that all 3 of these are stitched together, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same process with the other 3 columns for my outer panel. After these 4 columns are stitched together, you want to go ahead and iron each one. So I pressed each one of these columns, and I actually pressed the seams open to make it a little bit easier for the next step, which is we're going to be stitching the columns together with the right sides facing, and we really want to do our best to line up those seams when we stitch. And again, we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance to connect all 4 of these columns. You could pin these columns together if you wanted, but they're so small that I'm just going straight to the machine, and I've lined up the seams the best that I can, and I'm just going to go straight down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to do a back stitch at the beginning and at the end. I've finished stitching together all 4 columns. Next, I'm going to iron this panel so that the seams in the back lay nice and flat, and then I'm going to stitch it onto one of the pieces of batting to give it a little bit more of a quilted and textured look. So I have my fabric panel centered on my piece of batting, and at the machine I'm going to bump up my stitch length to 5 millimeters, which is really long stitches because we're just adding the sort of quilted look right now. And I'm going to go ahead and start on It doesn't really matter where you start. I'm going to start on the right side, and I'm going to do a stitch next to this seam about a quarter of an inch away from that seam. And you don't really need to do a back stitch because these are decorative stitches on the top. And now that I have this first row of stitches, I'm going to go ahead and repeat that on both sides of these vertical seams all the way down my panel. So I've added 6 rows of stitching, 2 around each of these vertical seams, and now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on my horizontal seam. So I'm going to add a row of stitching here and here and here and here. So now I've got all these extra rows of stitches on the top, which give it a really pretty quilted look. And what we want to do next is just go through all those steps again with the remaining squares of fabric. You can try to match this pattern or get creative and do a somewhat different pattern. And we'll go ahead and piece these together in the same way. So both of the outer panels are sewn up now, and you might want to take a moment and kind of straighten out the edges, and then we're ready to assemble the bag. We're going to take our zipper and put it at the top edge of one of our outer pieces with the top or the right side of the zipper facing the right side of the fabric. And then you'll want to get your clips and just clip it in place. I think 3 clips is probably good for this length. And then we're going to add in one of our liner pieces, and if your liner piece is a print, you want the right side of your liner fabric facing the right side of your outer panel. And we're just going to add this into our clips. At the machine, you want to lift your presser foot and swap it out for your zipper foot. So we'll just get this clicked into position. And then we are going to stitch along this raw edge with about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and we want to do a back stitch at the start and the stop. When you get near the pull of your zipper, what you want to do is get your needle down, lift your presser foot, and then just push the pull out of the way towards the back. So you want to get it all the way to the back of your bag, and you might have to muscle it a little bit. There we go. And then just keep sewing straight down. Now we want to check that we caught the all 4 layers in our seam, and we did. And then what we're going to do is just repeat those same steps on the other side of the zipper tape, starting with the outer panel, right side on top of the zipper, and clip that into place. 3 clips is probably good, and then flip it over, and then we're gonna get the lining in place. And again, if it had a right side, it'd be right side of the lining facing the right side of the lining, and just get that in there and sew again. Again, you want to double check that you got all 4 layers in your seam, and then we're going to open this up so that the bag is laying flat like this, and we want to take it to the iron and press it really well away from the zipper teeth on the top. Flip it over and press really well on the bottom so that the fabric is pressed away from the zipper. So after the fabric's been pressed on both sides, we're back at the machine, and we're going to do a top stitch along both sides of the zipper. And I've bumped my stitch length back up to 5 millimeters so that the top stitching matches the stitching that we did down here. But you don't have to do that. All right, our little pouch is starting to take shape. It's already looking really, really cute. We are ready to stitch the bag together, so we are getting really close to the end. What we want to do next is get your little 3-inch ribbon, and what we're going to be doing is folding well, first unzip your zipper a little bit, and then we're going to fold bring the right sides of the outer panels together and the right sides of the inner panels together. And then we're going to be clipping along these 4 raw edges, and we're going to stitch all the way around with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but we want to leave an opening of about 3 inches in our liner fabric. And I always like to start by lining up the seams at the zipper and make sure that the zipper tape is pointing down into the lining. So we want those seams to be lined up nicely, and then we're going to get a clip and just clip it. Okay, and then I always go to the other side and make sure that it's lined up on the other side as well. So as best we can, we want these seams to line up with each other. It's a little hard to show, but just do your best. And then we'll go ahead and put a clip on this end. And then before I clip all the other sides, I'm going to take my 3-inch ribbon, or this is just a little bit of strap that I made, and I want to put it in between the outer panels. I'm going to put it pretty close to the top, so it's maybe about a 1/2 inch from the zipper, and I want it to stick out about 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 of an inch, so that I know for sure I'm going to catch it in my seam. And I'm going to get a clip there. And then I always add a little no trace tag, so if you have your own tags, you want to go ahead and get that in between the outer layers. I like to put it right under this little mini strap, little loop that I'm adding there. Okay, and now we're ready to throw a few more clips around the other sides of our bag. And I always recommend, if you're just getting started sewing, use a lot of clips and pins because it really helps you. If you're a little more experienced, or you do a lot of sewing, you probably don't need so many clips and pins. So we're just going to add one more right here. And then I'm going to start stitching in the lining fabric right about here, so that I remember to leave a 3-inch opening in the liner. Now before I start stitching, I'm going to take my zipper foot off, and I'm going to put my standard presser foot back on, and I'm going to turn my stitch length back down to about 3 millimeters, which is where I usually sew. And again, we're doing about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Whoop. All the way around, and we want to do a back stitch at the start and the stop. So we're coming up on the little ribbon or the little loop that we put in on the side. So what I want to do is make sure that the ribbon is still in there, pretty much straight. It hasn't gotten crooked. And then I'm going to sew over it, and I'm going to reinforce it with 2 extra rows of stitches. And then reverse. Whoop, my zipper's a little bit in the way. And then just keep going all the way around. So you want to double check your work that you caught all of your layers in your seam, especially over by the zipper, and it's not a big deal if you missed anything. I think I'm actually going to go over this section again and make sure that I've grabbed enough fabric in that spot, and then I just want to peek and make sure everything else looks good. And it does. All right, I'm just going to reinforce this area, and then we'll go ahead and turn it right side out. Now, if you want to trim off some of the bulk around the edges, you can. I usually just leave that there because it gives the bag a little more protection, a little more body, and it doesn't create unnecessary scraps in the process. So I tend to just leave that there. Okay, so I've opened up the zipper all the way, and now I am pulling the outside out, and I'll probably grab my chopstick and really get these corners pushed out. Oh my goodness, it's so cute. All right, so I got a chopstick here. I'm just gonna get into those corners and try to get them to be a little more pointy than they are. And they don't have to be perfectly pointy. If you decide to take off the bulk from the edges of your seams, then you'll get pointier corners than this. And you want to push out this spot And you also want to push out the corners of the liner because we're going to take the liner over to the machine and stitch that opening closed. And if you don't push out these corners, you could accidentally catch some fabric in this seam that you don't want to. So just make sure these corners are all the way pushed out. And then the last step is to close this up at the sewing machine. All right, so I stitched that opening closed. Then we're just going to push the liner all the way into the outer part of our zipper pouch and use the chopstick to get those corners way down in there. And then check for loose threads. Make sure your zipper works. And then you're done. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it inspires you to get out there and use up some of your smaller scraps of fabric, turn them into something functional and beautiful. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the No Trace channel to get notified about all of our videos. We put out a new video on zero waste sewing and crafting every single week. So I'll see you again very soon.